he said, yes, we did. Did he do it? Let's go to Mr. Paal.
Well, I think the accomplishments of Obama are very much on the chopping table right now. His legacy has been overturned in 36 state capitals, the Congress, the House, Senate, and in the White House now. And the agenda for all of these opposition forces is to undo his legacy. So I think this was not so much a final shout out by Mr. Obama in Chicago, but an announcement that he's really going to fight to preserve what remains of his legacy in the adverse circumstances of the new Trump administration.
Professor Hagel, is he a success or is he a failure in terms of Washington politics?
For presidents that are just leaving office, it's often a mixed bag in terms of whether they're considered a success or a failure. Certainly, as we saw last night, President Obama pointed to what he believes to his successes were, but on the other hand, we've also seen where there are criticisms. And as Mr. Paal indicated, that there have been a lot of changes over President Obama's 8 years in terms of more Republicans being elected, Democrats being thrown out of office. We don't know about Obamacare, what's going to happen to it. So at this point, it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Dr. Wang here in Beijing, you translate the earlier book, autobiography of Mr. Obama. Obviously, he's apparently is a man of idealism, at least idealism in the American way. Does that still work in today's American society and politics?
I think President Obama actually represents a new generation of actually American politicians, because he was really well educated and well background in terms of in different international background. In terms he lived in Indonesia and from early childhood, coming from a both cultural family, was American heritage.
Right.
So he actually brings some new image, how to speak, and then new idealism into the American political arena. I think he actually did that, and he achieved that, and he's the first black American has ever won a presidential election and has inspired a lot of the people.
Well, that's for sure, 8 years ago, but is he still an inspiring figure, Mr. Paal, at this point?
Well, I think his rhetoric remains uniquely accomplished. He can really get an audience to its feet. But the problem is people then say afterwards, well, what after that? He has been less substantial in foreign affairs, and his legacy in domestic affairs is, as I said earlier, on the chopping block right now.
Right.
And we'll see how much remains after the fight takes place.
Mr. Obama, when he became the president, people were having the hope that he could be probably a unifying figure, given his beautiful oral skills, and also he's, representing a younger generation of different politicians. Professor Hagel, though, at this point, you also see, for example, today, the right-wing politicians are becoming some of the most important figures sitting on the bench in Washington. And that has never happened in the past many years. So you would wonder, really, would an idealistic politician help the United States over the past 8 years, or actually drag it further even down into the world of a divided country?
Well, it's certainly true that there was, as the slogan indicated, a lot of hope for change when President Obama was first elected. The problem is that Obama, despite his youth, which was a positive thing for him in terms of getting elected, he didn't apparently have the experience necessary to be able to work effectively with Congress and basically to convince the legislators to go along with whatever it was that he wanted. He got Obamacare through, of course, during the time when he had Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress. But since then, he hasn't been able to follow through in ways that seem to be able to show his ability to work with, again, members of Congress, and particularly the Republicans. And I think that has really undercut his ability to get things done, and that has given the Republicans and those on the right a chance to show whether they can do it. Now, of course, they're on the block, so to speak, in terms of now they have to produce, because they've made a lot of promises. They said they want to fix things. Can they do it?
But Mr. Paal, when you look at the presidencies over the past few years in the United States, It's either family politics, for example, the Bush family, both the father and the son, or another family politics, for example, the Clinton family, or mainly rich business person, including the president-elect Donald Trump, sitting there in the White House. Mr. Obama is the only one that seems to be an quote-unquote an outlaw within this pattern. Is his failure politically also a demonstration of the fact that probably the American politics is, as some say, the cliche? It is about the family business. It is about a power struggle in a way, just between some of the already very strong individuals and families. Mr. Paal.
Well, in democracies, you have to have name recognition. You have to be easily identifiable in the minds of people who don't often think about politics when it comes time for them to vote. And so having name recognition through a big family or for a big fortune, or in Mr. Trump's case, an identifiable brand, is a big plus in getting ahead of your other rivals for the nominations to be president. The other part of this, though, is that we swing. We have this kind of pendulum quality. We tend to elect the opposite of the last leader. George Bush was the opposite of Bill Clinton in many, many ways, and set out to do everything in a different direction when he took office. We saw that with Obama trying to be the opposite. You know, George Bush was thought to be not very articulate. Obama was ultimately articulate. And now we have Trump coming in trying to undo everything that Obama did. Eventually, you know, 18 months or 2 years from now, we'll sort of find him, we'll stop oscillating quite so much. And then the new president will have to accumulate a record against which the next person will run.
Okay.
It's the nature of the process.
Well, probably you could argue that the pendulum in politics, but Dr. Wang, today's world, today's United States, it's quite different, let's just say from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. At the time there was a Cold War, at the time there was the only power of the world, but now there's so much change. And therefore, Dr. Wang, from your perspective, this kind of political pendulum from the most powerful country in the world, its impact, in a way, at this point, it's very hard to imagine, both for the United States itself and the rest of the world.
It is. Actually, now the world has changed so much in the last 8 years, and we see China is rising, and also we see the European is undergoing a lot of changes. We see Occupy Wall Street action movement happened under the eyes of Obama. So the world is, and also the globalization and deglobalization is all kind of current is going on, and so I think the future leadership now has to look at a much broader views, much broader world now than probably in the past, and then also. Internationally, we got the coexistence. There's a risk and there's a danger. There's an economy challenge, and so it's all facing the future politicians how to really make the world go around and together and peacefully, and that's a big challenge ahead.
Well, as the other guest also said, that these questions, it seems that Mr. Obama, still a young man, I would say, at this point, is willing to further answer in his professional career. It was not at all humorless, grinding government work in 8 years of President Obama at the White House. He was also a softie at heart that shone through during lighter times when his staff and unguarded moments with the public caught on camera. Here's a look at some of them through the years. Look at this man. Well, that's President Obama in lighter moments. People always ask, when the president leaves office, shouldn't that be the best time to criticize that specific individual? Well, you could if there are certain points that are concrete. But when we look at presidencies and the people behind the presidencies, we have to have a fairer attitude. And therefore, gentlemen, let's focus now not on himself personally, idealism, but rather on international relations. Professor Hagel, President Obama, with his idealism, made, in a way, headlines about Cuba, about Iran. And yet, he also has not, in a way, fixed the relationship with Russia. What do you feel about this mixture?
Well, I think that the word mixture is a good word to describe it. It's often difficult to put a president's legacy in historical perspective when he or she is just leaving office. This is the case for Obama now. That usually takes a little bit of time to see, well, what's the legacy of a particular president. But certainly those are things that Obama thought were positive parts of his legacy. Others would disagree, particularly on the Republican side. But we have to see, I suppose, in a few years whether there are positive effects from those actions.
Mr. Paal, we don't know the next president going to continue at all about Cuba, about Iran. But Mr. Obama, will his legacy last? How much does it have to do with the future of others' policies?
Well, you know, just today we've had a breakthrough where China has sent the Liaoning aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait. Just 20 years ago, when there was tension over Taiwan's internal developments and China was firing missiles near Taiwan, the U.S. sent 2 aircraft carriers and China had no response to that. Today, China has a capability that it did not have 20 years ago. And a man sitting in the White House making decisions on these matters now has to take that into consideration. So it's a more sober and a complicated world to address from the new presidency.
Dr. Wang, I'm sure you want to respond about that point.
Yeah, no, I think that the situation does change actually for the last 20-some years, and that China is now become the second largest economy, and coming with that with the more recognition locally and internationally. So I think now is how do we make this peaceful coexistence between the major powers of the world, and also for China to really in terms of the investment, in terms of international relations, in terms of the people-to-people exchanges, how to maintain that, avoid risk and avoid conflict, and that's really the key challenge ahead. I think that's particularly with the new coming uncertainty of Donald Trump, and that's really people are looking at what's
the
next.
roles of China and the United States, and how would the two adjust themselves while looking at the other's egos and also movement at the same time. We talk about President Obama in the United States. He actually has paid quite a lot of attention to China-U.S. relations. If you look at the numbers, he's been meeting with the Chinese leaders. He kept a very high frequency of meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Over 140 mechanisms have been established between the two countries, by the way. The China and United States mutual understanding has been significantly improved, and the world's top 2 economies have worked together on many global issues. These words might sound big, but actually, these two gentlemen have been working together over the past 3 years, just giving many of the top occasions, the G20, APEC summit, all of these occasions. Mr. Paal, now here's the thing. President Obama talked about pivot to Asia, and then later known as rebalance. Many Chinese do not take it favorably. However, you also see on the other hand, most frequent exchanges between the Chinese president and the American president. The American president has to be willing to do this, at least. So what do you think, once again, about this mixture?
Well, I think it's an incomplete success. The revitalization of American diplomacy in the Asia-Pacific, which is represented in part by the many meetings and mechanisms you've just referred to, was fairly successful. It was not a big departure from the Bush administration. It was more a continuation. He also had a big trade initiative, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which again was started by the Bush administration and which was the economic core of the rebalance to Asia. Here, I think he made very significant political mistakes in moving that agreement forward and delaying it to a political year when it became a football and has now been pushed off the field for the time being, maybe forever. And then finally, there was an overemphasis on the security side. A lot of rhetoric, but not much action about how the U.S. was going to address the needs for increased security capabilities in the Asia-Pacific. So I guess the final point to make is that this would be an incomplete grade for him, less than successful. I expect it'll be high on the agenda of the upcoming administration to try to put their own stamp on what's happening.
But Professor Hagel, on the other hand, what will the next president do? I mean, at this point, it seems that President Obama was trying to do some strategic, preemptive kinds of policies. And yet, is the next president going to move into concrete policies? And will that be beneficial for the two countries? Or will that only put the two countries more in the possibility of being the foes against one another? Professor Hagel.
Well, that's a big question at this point. I think at this point, many people, and perhaps many people in other countries, aren't really sure what to make of Donald Trump, especially when he becomes president. Will he change from what he acted like as a candidate? Will he continue the same sort of style that he used that seems to be antagonistic, big talk, but then you come to the table and are willing to negotiate? That's what we have to see. He's talked a lot about China as a candidate, but what will he do in terms of being the president? Was that just big talk to get people to negotiate at the table? And I have to say that it seemed to be a positive thing for the two countries when he chose Iowa's Governor Branstad, who has a good relationship with China, to be his ambassador. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out.
Well, being an ambassador is not necessarily the key position for China policy, but rather to implement the China policy. Dr. Wang, what is your judgment of President Obama? He's probably complex thinking curve about the policies toward China with the pivot to Asia and later all of these exchanges.
Yeah, I agree with the previous panelist said. It's a mixed bag, and but on the whole, I think still during his tenure at 8 years in office, the Sino-U.S. relation largely was stable, and even though with coming back pivot to Asia, but still there's no major conflict actually between the two. And but also on the other hand, I think the trade is still getting very big. Now we have a 500 billion bilateral trade, and also investment was growing enormously. China now is having larger investment into the United States than United States into China. And also we have more people to exchanges. We have half a million students going abroad, over half of them go to the
But
United
that could
States.
change, right?
Yeah,
If the political relations really cooled down.
Yes. But I think that's also the other momentum to make the political stable, because we have several million tourists, we have a 10-year multiple entry visa, we have half a million students going to the United States every year. So all those people-to-people exchange, I think it's very vital to keep the two countries.
But there is
in
one
good relations.
complex that is going on right now, which is that the president-elect, Mr. Trump's relations with Russia. China has always been saying this is not necessarily a triangle relationship. And in Washington, though, people have been shaping it to a certain extent in that way. So at this point, we don't know, because intelligence information also suggests that Russia probably has in hand some information of President-elect Donald Trump that the latter might not necessarily like. But putting those aside, do you think, what kind of vision, Dr. Wang, do you think the leaders of both countries really need to have, whether they're Republican or Democrat, whether they are young or old, really need to have at this point?
Absolutely, you're right. I think the leaders of both countries actually should look into the future. And also considering now the U.S. and China are the two largest economy in the world, and then there's in history all-time high exchanges among the people, among the investment, among the exchanges of culture and everything. So I think in the future also there's a global governance 2.0 is taking shape. The G20 is happening. I think in the future, President Xi has actually proposed at the Lima APEC summit about FTAP, which is originally proposed by the U.S. I think in the future, this could be a new trade scheme that look at the global situation and then play more roles for U.S. and China together for the world peace ahead.
Professor Hagel, before we go, 30 seconds for you as well. Do you think there will be two key global players, or just one of them still looking at globalization while the other way has already turned its back?
I think that I would agree with the professor in the sense that China and the United States do need to work together, that they do seem to be the major players. Certainly Russia would want to be part of that as well, but at least right now it seems that the United States and China need to find ways to work together.